Robert Pitt, Associate at Handrett Curran, will step us through the key items to look at when assessing a startup idea. Rob, I'll leave it over to you to take the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Tuesday morning. We're going to step through today on looking at and assessing startup businesses and ideas just to ascertain exactly what it would take to see if they're going to be a successful business. As I introduced, I'm Robert Pitt, Associate at Handrett Curran. I came up with this guide after many years of dealing with some startup businesses and also some regular businesses that actually may have been well established but actually hadn't addressed some of the aspects that we're going to be looking in the guide here. And I've also been involved in the startup of a business before as well. So some of this knowledge comes firsthand as to the experiences that I had when that was occurring. So I like to run a fairly interactive session, so if you have any questions during the session, please use the chat screen, and I think would be the bottom left-hand corner. So obviously your audio has been muted, but you can type a message in that little chat screen. I'll just put an example there. So please put your questions here. Okay. So if you have any questions during the session, please just type them in there and we'll address them as we go. We'll also have some time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. So that being said, we'll make a start. So obviously at the moment, with the startup community, there's obviously a lot of excitement. So looking at it, the state and federal governments are both throwing a fair bit of money at the sector because what they see is obviously with some declining parts of the economy, they're seeing the startup space as being the new breeding ground for economic success for Australia. So they're throwing money at this issue in the hopes that some will stick and we'll get a few good ideas that will move the country forward. Obviously, we've got shows like the Shark Tank, which have been successful and obviously created a lot of excitement in here. And obviously, we're all aware of some of the most famous startup successes. You know, people like Bill Gates with Microsoft, Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, and obviously Steve Jobs with Apple. So, and I mean, we've got some Australian success stories as well. The guys that formed the Atlassian business, which unfortunately now sort of domiciles itself in the US, but again, it was an Australian startup that became quite successful, and it still is quite successful as well. So, obviously, with all this excitement, and if you come across somebody who's got a great idea, they're generally very excited as well, and that excitement can generate. Or can be a bit infectious, and we can get caught up in the emotion and the excitement of it, and maybe not necessarily sit back and look at it and say, okay, well, is it actually genuinely a good business idea? Does it have the capacity to make some money? So this 7-step guide will help you to go through the process and take out the emotion and look at it a bit analytically. So, and obviously, as we say there, find the diamond in the rough. Okay, so the first step to assessing any new idea that comes across is to actually figure out what problem is being solved. So if we think about some of the success stories in the past, we look at the Hills Hoist clothesline. So obviously a very old innovation idea, but when it came onto the market, it became a very successful product for a very long period of time. It clearly solved the problem of some space issues about stringing up a bit of clothesline between two, and it created everything in a fairly central spot, allowed the thing to rotate, for access, and obviously had some drying properties and those sort of things. So there was a clear problem that it was solving, and it became very successful. We've got the iPod there. which wasn't the first to market when it comes to digital music players, but what it did do was it pulled together and solved some of the issues about the early digital media players, and the fact that they were very small, didn't hold a lot of songs. You had to upload your own music to them, which means that you had to buy CDs and then save them to a computer and then upload them to the devices. Whereas with the iPods, they had a fairly large storage capacity, which meant that people could take a large number of songs on the run with them, but they could also buy directly and download directly into the iPod device itself. So there's a bit of an ecosystem there, and it basically created a truly mobile solution for people that want to take music on the run with them. Uber, obviously everyone's heard of Uber. They've seen it. It basically revolutionised the taxi industry. So the clear problem that was being solved there was that customers were having some fairly significant customer-related issues with the taxi industry. So the Uber created a platform which basically allowed customers to review drivers, and the bad drivers then got eliminated out of the system, which means that it was solving a customer relations issue for those transport requirements. And then finally, we've got Wi-Fi, an Australian invention. And basically, if you are old enough to remember the days pre-Wi-Fi, if you wanted to network your computer, you had to run a big long cable from one computer to another, or from a router to another. And sometimes if you wanted to connect one computer on one side of the house to the other, there was a big long cable that had to run through the house. Well, Wi-Fi solved all of that by basically creating a wireless connection between the two. So again, very clear problems that were being solved, and obviously very successful solutions. So what you need to do is, when you're looking at the new business idea, you need to clearly identify what problem is being solved. And by identifying that and being able to clearly explain that will be the first step in the process. And being able to explain this problem will allow you to do more work down the track as well. Okay, so as I said before, if there are any questions as we go along, if I'm going too fast, too slow, just let me know. But we'll push on if there are no questions on that one. So solving a problem is one thing. So if you're very clear on what problem you're solving, the next question to then ask is, well, does that solution actually create any value? So we can solve a problem, but if the solution to the problem actually creates no value, then there's going to be no business there. So what do we mean by that? Well, I think the best way to describe this or explain it is to show you some examples. So you're all looking at some fairly funny photos there. This was called the privacy scarf. So essentially what this was saying, it was solving a problem that people had no privacy when they were out and about looking at their phones or their tablets. People could look over your shoulder or glance sideways and actually see what you were doing on your screen. So this privacy scarf solved that problem. And I think it solved the problem very well, because nobody could see what you're on your screen there. However, we can all agree it looks pretty ridiculous. And what we can also agree is that it maybe isn't the biggest problem in the world either. So the value of this solution that's created was obviously very low, and hence why the product really never took off. Sorry. So some other examples. There was the self-stirring mug. So basically this was pitched at people who were too lazy to stir their drink. So it had a little mechanism in there which actually stirred the drink for you. You press the little button and away you go. Now again, it solves the problem. However, I can't imagine anyone spending extra money on a coffee cup to save themselves a few seconds of stirring a mug. So again, it solved the problem, very clear on that solution, but there was no value created in that solution. So another example that I managed to find when doing some research was bed books. So of all the people that have read in bed, they'll know that when you're reading a book, you always find it a bit uncomfortable. Try and find a good spot to actually get comfortable in reading your book. So what this did was it printed all of the text sideways, so you could lie in bed, put the book upright so it could sit there comfortably, and you could then easily read the book by doing that. The problem with that is that we obviously don't exclusively read in bed, so then it became a little awkward when you were sitting around somewhere else reading your book sideways and everyone was looking at you funny. Again, it solved the problem. It was a very clear problem, but there was not a lot of value in the solution. The final example that I came across was the perfect pancake. So essentially, it was a double-sided frying pan that allowed you to flip your pancakes with no mess. Now, again, solves a fairly good problem, but essentially, if you're looking at buying a whole new frying pan just for your pancakes, again, there's no real value in that solution. So, as you can see, for some of the really successful products like Wi-Fi and Uber and those sort of things, there was real value in solving that problem. People were really upset about the bad experiences they were achieving with taxis. People were really having issues with cabling computers, and there was a very high cost in doing so as well. So there was real value in these solutions when they came to the market. Whereas the examples I've given here just before, obviously not a lot of value in those. Okay, so we've determined what problem we're solving, we've clearly defined that, and what we've also determined is that there is really some good value in solving that problem for our potential customers. So what we need to determine now is, who are those customers? What's the market size that we're looking at for this particular solution? Okay, so you've got to ask the question, well, why is market size important? If you've got the solution to this really awesome problem and there's value in creating that solution, but if there are only 5 people in the world that experience that problem and your market size is 5, then it's probably not going to create a very good business because there's not enough customers there to keep it viable. So by defining the market and its size, well, we're able to assess in the next few steps the feasibility of the business. So when we're looking at defining the market and its size, we need to know, who are they? Are they individuals? Are they organisations? If they're organisations, are they not-for-profit? Are they government? Are they business? If they're business, what industry are they in? If they're not-for-profit, what's their cause? What drives them? What motivates them? Okay, where are they located geographically? Why do they do what they do? So you need to understand as much as you can about who they are to try and get an accurate picture about the market size. Now, you don't need to spend a huge amount of time trying to figure out the exact market size here. You can spend too much time doing this research, but what you want to do is just get a good idea about what sort of market size you're looking at, just to determine if there's enough feasibility there to move forward to the next step. As I said before, if your solution presents that there are really only 5 people in the world that experience that, quite clearly you can tell right from the word go that unless you can charge a large amount of money for that, the business is probably not going to be feasible. On the flip side, if you roughly look at it and think, okay, well, there's 1 billion people that are experiencing this problem, then that's going to be a pretty good indicator that there's a big enough market size for you to be able to at least proceed to the next few steps about assessing whether or not it's going to be successful. So, as I said, try and define as tightly as possible who they are, using all those different aspects, and then try and just generate a rough idea about the number of people there are in relation to that. I would break that down to geographic locations depending on the solution of your problem as well. So if the solution you're looking at is a physical solution, as in it needs you to be physically there or deliver a physical product, you want to break your potential customer base or market size down to geographic areas. Obviously, if you physically need to be there, you need to start locally and then branch out to certain sizes from there. However, if you're looking at an online solution or a virtual solution, then obviously you can more focus on a global population in relation to the market size. Okay. So as I said before, if the market size is low, that's an indication that it's maybe not going to be financially viable. However, if the market size is low, but the solution price is very high and there are very big margins on that, then it could be financially viable. On the flip side, having a very large market size is an indicator of potentially the business being viable. However, if it's a very low cost item with very low margins, then a large market size could still be not economically viable. So obviously this is just the first step in relation to assessing the viability of that. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. So once we've actually determined our market size, we then need to assess our competition. And the reason we need to do that is we could have 1 billion people that are out there as potential customers of our solution, but if those customers are already being serviced by our competition, then obviously it's going to be very tough to crack into that market. So what we need to do is assess several different aspects of the competition in relation to our particular solution. So, and I've broken that into 3 broad groups. The first one is solving the problem in the same way that your solution is. The second one is solving the problem in a different way to your solution. And then the third one is solving a similar problem that could readily adapt to solving the problem that you're looking at. So I'll talk about those in a little more detail. So the first group of the competition that we're looking at is somebody solving the problem in the same way. So an example of this would be, and coming back to our Uber example, we're looking at taxis and Uber. So although Uber have kind of turned the market on its head with the way they're delivering this, they're still solving the same problem in the same way. They're still looking at the problem being solved here is taking passengers from one point to another on a small scale. So taxis do it obviously via their system, Uber does it via their app, and doing a ride share type thing, but essentially it's a car taking a person from one point to another. Okay, so that's what we mean by direct competition. Okay, so what you need to look at is how long have they been servicing this market? Okay, so are they new to the market or have they been servicing it for 30 odd years? Obviously, the longer that they've been entrenched, the harder it may be to compete against them. But again, if we look at Uber's example, they were able to do things fairly innovatively, so that they've actually been able to create a pretty good inroads into an industry that's been established there for a very long time. How much market share do they have in your target market? Okay, so again, having a look at how long they've been established, but how much of a market share do they actually have? Do we have one competitor dominating the market? Do we have lots of little competitors all sharing the same market? These are the things that we need to look at. Where are they located? So again, coming back to potentially our marketplace and that sort of thing, if we've got a fairly local solution and we've got competitors in the market but they're located nowhere locally, then obviously that's going to be a good thing. However, they could potentially expand geographically and come into your area, or alternatively, you know, if they're based overseas and really the Australian market's not too saturated, again, there's potentially opportunities there. So we just need to go through and assess the aspects of that. How effective is their solution and service delivery? Again, if we come back to the taxi versus Uber, so taxis were basically a monopoly. They had the market cornered because of licensing of taking passengers from one place to another using their car. Excluding limousines, but again, limousines were under similar regulations to the taxis. Okay, so, but their solution was very effective, but their customer service was very poor. So their service delivery was poor, but their solution was very effective. So Uber have come in with a very effective solution and really great service delivery. Okay, so assessing these things will give you an understanding about how you're potentially going to compete with the existing players in the market. And then finally, what you need to determine is what is it about your solution that will differentiate it from their solution, and why will the market care about that? Okay, so, you know, looking at your solution, and you may have a point of differentiation, but again, if we come back to step 2 in actually, does the solution create value? Does your differentiation create value as well? Is there value in your differentiation between their solution and your solution that will actually compel people to actually come along and buy yours? So, so the second group we're looking at is somebody else solving the same problem in a different way. Okay, so, and this is often referred to as a product substitute. So taking our last example of the taxis and Uber, so an example of this would be public transport. So again, public transport transports people from one point to another. However, public transport does it en masse. It's timetabled rather than on demand. And again, it doesn't go from exactly one point to another unless you potentially make connections and do those sort of things. But again, it is a competitor to the taxi industry and to the Uber industry, but it is a product substitution. So obviously with public transport, they can't offer the same convenience as a taxi or an Uber, but the way that public transport competes is based on price. So it's obviously a lot cheaper product, and therefore that's their differentiation, and that's how they compete. So when we're looking at our solution, even though there may not be a direct competitor solving the problem in the same way, there may be a substitute that people will go to if you don't provide the right value proposition to those potential customers. Okay. And as with the first group, those questions that we spoke about before, how long have they been in the market? How much market share do they have? Where are they located? How effective is their solution? And what is it about your solution that differentiates from them? You need to ask this group the same questions. Okay. And then our third group is somebody else solving a problem, solving a similar problem, but potentially has the capability to adapt their solution to your problem. Okay, so, and again, we're going to continue on with the Uber and taxi example. So let's have a think about the courier industry. So again, what it's doing is it's taking parcels from one point to another. Okay, so if we were in the courier industry and we were looking at that, we would potentially assess whether or not Uber could be a competitor to us by adapting their model of transporting people to actually transporting packages. So could Uber adapt their platform to disrupt the local courier industry? To assess the potential disruption, what you've got to look at is you've got to ask the following questions. Are there problems being solved that are similar in nature to the one you're solving? Okay, so again, looking at that example, taxis solve moving people, couriers solve moving parcels, point to point. So again, we've got some similar problems, we've just got a different thing being carted. How easily could any of the solutions to those other problems be adapted to your problem? So looking at it and saying, okay, well, they're solving problem X, you've got problem Y, there's similar problems, they're solving that. How easily could their solution be applied to the problem that you're solving? So, and the reason we ask that is because obviously this would be an established business, and some people don't have the innovational vision to create new solutions and those sort of things. So when you come onto the market and you've got a solution to a problem that nobody's thought about before, it's potentially fairly easy to copy. So if you're there as a startup, you've got the solution, great idea, away you go, but you've got this competitor sitting off to the side that's a massive organisation, large amounts of resources solving a similar problem. They look at you solving that problem and go, well, actually, you know what, we can adapt our solution to that particular problem, and all of a sudden you've got a very big organisation with loads of resources that can basically come in over the top of you. So being aware of these similar problems and the competitors that are solving those similar problems is very important to again assess whether or not there's going to be competition there. Now, you certainly don't want to do this to then dampen your enthusiasm, but what you're wanting to do this for is just to ascertain if there are going to be problems down the track, and potentially even come up with ideas now about how to counteract these issues if they do occur as they happen. So also what you've got to ask is for the providers of these solutions, are they big enough to have those resources to be able to adapt, and do they have a history of diversifying? So if they've been solving one problem for 50 years and they've never diversified and never moved out of their own particular industry, then you may feel a bit safer in the fact that they're probably not going to go after your particular solution. However, if they're a fairly innovative company, constantly buying other companies and adapting into new markets and new solutions and those sort of things, then obviously there's some areas of concern there. So we're now going to go on to the next step, but what we've looked at so far, just to recap, so we've clearly defined what the problem's going to be that we're solving. We've actually looked at whether or not that solution is going to create value. We've then ascertained the size of the potential market solution, and we've defined what that market is going to look like. And then we've assessed the competition to see whether or not there might be a place in the market for us and our solution. So once we've gone through those, now comes the hard part. Actually determining whether or not the business will be financially viable. I've done a lot of mentoring sessions at places like Startup Weekends, which are very intensive. People have great new ideas, solve problems, they're brilliant, all those sort of things. And when I have these mentoring sessions, the weekend started on Friday night. I then head there on a Saturday afternoon. They've had sort of probably about 18 hours really hard work trying to build together their solution and have a look at the technical aspects and all those sort of things. And I sit down with them, and the first question I ask is, how's it going to make money? And the amount of times I've had people look at me blankly and then say, I haven't thought about that. And which surprises me greatly, but again, I am an accountant. So, but the thing that you need to ascertain is solving this problem is fantastic, but it needs to be financially viable. It needs to make a profit, otherwise why would you invest in it? Other than if you're a philanthropist and are actually donating things to a particular industry. So it needs to be financially viable. Okay, so how do we determine that? Well, to do that, we actually need to build a financial model for the business. Sorry, just technical glitch there. So what do we need to do to assess the financial viability and to build the model? Well, the first thing we need to look at is determine a price that you can charge for your solution and how often that charge is or how it's going to be. So is it a one-off charge where you're selling an item or selling a service? Or is it a recurring charge? Is it a subscription model? Or is it a consumable type item where people are going to keep coming back? Or is it a capital item where someone buys one once and then doesn't need to buy another one for 3 or 4 years or 5 years or even for their own lifetime? So you need to determine what price you're going to charge and how often is that going to happen for each customer. And also, are there different levels to the solution as well? So, you know, you look at it, let's say McDonald's. You go to McDonald's and buy a cheeseburger. It's the cheapest product. It's a little burger. And then you've got burgers that then scale up in price and size. So are there multiple sizes or multiple aspects to your solution that can be priced differently? So again, looking at this and determining what that's going to look like. So then what you do is then say, okay, well, we've looked at the market size and we've potentially determined what market share we can do when we've assessed our competition. So we apply the market size and the market share to give us some customer numbers, and then we multiply those customer numbers by the price we can charge for our solution and the frequency in which we charge that. That will then give us a potential revenue figure for the business. Now, what we want to look at is, at this particular step, we're looking at a mature business. So what we want to do is put ourselves in the shoes of when the business is actually at its maturity. So it's maybe a year in, 2 years in, 5 years in, where you've built the business up to a stage where it would be status quo, it would be as per normal. And so we want to look at the financial viability of it at that stage. Okay, we'll do the aspects of the build-up phase in the next step, but for now we're looking at potentially a mature business. So looking at the prices that we could charge for our solution, applying that to the market size and our market share that we've determined to get a potential revenue model. Then what we've got to look at is we've then got to determine the costs to actually do that. So the first thing is the cost to sell the solution. So I know most business people like to think that they set up their shingle, they create a product and everyone just comes flocking because they want the solution. Don't need to market, don't need to advertise, don't need to sell. They're just going to come, hand you the cash, away they go. Never happens. There are costs in relation to marketing and selling, so you need to determine what they are. So the employment costs for salespeople and their administration support. Commissions, so for salespeople, or potentially other avenues. You could look at agents, you could look at other things where you pay a commission for sales. The travel costs, so you know, if your sales guys need to go on the road, what are their travel costs? Are they running with the car? Are they flying? Are they hire cars, accommodation, meals, entertainment, all those sorts of things. And also going to marketing events as well. Do you need to go to trade shows? Do you need to go to sales presentations? Do you need to go to conferences? What are the costs involved in doing all those sort of things? Then, of course, direct advertising and promotion expenses, and then transaction costs as well in relation to merchant fees, transaction fees, etc., etc. So you need to determine, now some of these costs, like transaction fees, can be built in the model as a per transaction type item. So as your sales increase, so do these costs. Commissions, same sort of way. Employment costs, again, that may be a sort of a stage thing. So at a certain level, you have a number of employees, but then when you get to another level, you may need to add a couple more, but there's no sort of direct correlation. As you increase one sale, you'll need to increase the employee. So once you've got the cost to sell the solution, sorry, we do have a question. Apologies, Paul. So have a Wi-Fi glitch. Just let me know if everyone's still okay. All good now? Excellent. Sorry, I'll continue. Okay. So we had cost to sell the solution. The next thing we've got is the cost to deliver the solution. So if the solution is a physical product, what we've got to look at is the manufacturing costs, the shipping costs, warehouse expenses, warranty claims. If the solution is a non-physical product, software development and maintenance, IT infrastructure costs, employment costs for people delivering the solution. If it's consultancy, obviously your consultants that you put out there on the road. And employment costs for providing after-sales service. And I'll cover this a little bit later, but quite often people think that after-sales service can be done by the salespeople. Quite often I think that it involves some very different skills. So that's why I've put the after-sales service down in the cost of delivering a solution rather than the cost of selling a solution. And then finally, the cost to administer the business. So this is employees that do the administration work, management, finance, internal support services, premises costs, rent, electricity, communication, IT infrastructure, public liability insurance, outsourced professional costs, accounting, legal, employment relations, insurance. All of these things are overheads that need to be built into the model as well. So once you've then determined potential revenue and then you've looked at your costs, obviously you then look at the bottom line and go, okay, is there a profit there? If there is, fantastic, it appears that the business will be viable. If it's not, rather than go, okay, hands in the air, that's not going to happen, it's not feasible, go back and have a look at the model again. Can we restructure the business to potentially make a profit? Can we change the way we deliver the products? Can we change the way that we warehouse it, ship it, sell it? What would we need to change to then make that business viable, and is that possible? So doing this analysis allows you to get a greater understanding about how that's all going to come together and allow you to then build the business up in a way that will be profitable once it reaches that viability point. But again, the work that you do here will give you a good understanding of that. Now, I must say that the financial model that you build at this point is probably going to look very different to the financial model that you will build in 2 or 3 years' time. Okay, because things will change and things will need to adapt. But by building the model now, you're going in with your eyes open as to what could happen. So you'll have an understanding about how it comes together. You know, if we increase sales by 20%, so once you've built the model, you can then do a bit of analysis and a bit of playing. So what you can do is you can up the market share and say, okay, well, instead of a 5% market share, we'll have a 7% market share. What does the revenue look like? What then happens to those costs? So the costs that actually scale up with new sales will then obviously scale up with that. The fixed costs that are fixed, you need to have a look at that and say, okay, well, if we increase our market share from 5% to 7%, Do we need more locations? Do we need a bigger premises? Do we need more people in admin and overheads? So we need to sort of build that up. But again, by doing that sort of analysis, you can then have a look at and understand what it would mean to grow the business or shrink the business or change some things around. But by building that financial model, it allows you to do that analysis. Okay, so we've clearly identified our problem. We've found that it creates value. We've determined who the market are and the market size, and we've assessed the competition. We've now determined that our business can be financially viable. So everything's looking good so far. However, between now and the point of actually becoming financially viable, there is a time period here. So what we need to look at is our strategy and is our plan to go from the point we are at now to the point of being feasible? Is that strategy, is that plan feasible? So there are several aspects to this. One is the actual steps that we anticipate that we're going to do realistic and feasible? So if we've built our business model and we say, okay, well, the market size is 10 billion people, we're going to pick up 10% of that market and we're going to get there in 2 years. And we've got our strategy that we've all put together, and you look at it and go, well, those actions are probably not going to lead to those results. So that's the first step in relation to our go-to-market strategy feasible. And that's a common sense approach where you need to be very, very honest with yourself about what you can actually achieve. We don't want to put on the rose-coloured glasses and go, yeah, we can achieve the world if we're actually not going to get there. So that's the first stage to the feasibility. The next stage is then actually determining whether or not financially feasible to get from point A now to when we actually achieve financial feasibility on an ongoing basis. So during that period of time, whilst sales are going to be non-existent to start with, but then potentially build up till we get to that point where we're financially feasible, there is a build-up period there. And invariably what's going to happen is that our revenue is going to be less than our expenses. There are also going to be times when we're going to require to inject money into the business to buy items. So we may need capital, we may need to invest in computer systems, we may need to invest in manufacturing tooling to be able to then manufacture the particular things that we're doing. All of these capital investments connected with the potential trading losses that we have whilst we become to a financially viable point, we need to model that to determine how much money are we going to need to get from now to the point where the business is financially viable and then self-sufficient in relation to cash. So becoming financially feasible is one thing, but being feasible and having enough cash resources to last you from this point to that financially feasible point is essential. And again, building the model along the timeline, so maybe a monthly cash flow and profit and loss forecasting model going across the next 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, and scaling it up that way. Putting that model together will give you an idea about what the cash flow and what the profitability and what everything's going to look like as you go through. Now, what you need to do then is also look at it and go, okay, well, I've put together my 18-month model because I think it's going to take me 18 months to get there. But what if it's going to take me 24 months or 36 months? So I then need to also build the model and maybe have a bit of a look at, well, if it's going to take me 24 months instead of 18 months, what does that new cash requirement look like? So, and then what you need to look at is potentially, okay, well, if I need X number of dollars over the next 3 years, I don't necessarily need to raise or get all of it now. But what I do need to know is that at particular points in time, I'm going to need some injections of cash and plan for that and maybe arrange those right from the start. Have a look at potentially milestones where you can hit a milestone, business becomes more valuable to then be able to get new injections of investment in to then be able to move it forward, or potentially funding from the bank as you go through and prove up your plan. So it is important not only for the business to be financially viable, but it must be viable during its development phase. Okay, so many ideas never get to market or never become successful because they simply run out of cash during that go-to-market strategy, or go-to-market phase. So financially viable in the long term, but also financially viable during that startup phase. Okay, and then finally, once you've got all that together, we've got a clear solution to a clear problem. The solution creates value. Okay, we've determined our market size, we've assessed the competition, we've worked out that on a long-term basis the business is financially viable. We've then looked at our go-to-market strategy and we're pretty happy with that. Our go-to-market strategy is financially feasible as well. Okay, what's the final step that we need to look at in relation to this idea? And that is the right team. So if you have a look at the picture on the left there, and if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a very young Mr. Bill Gates. So this photo is from 1978, and it's the team of Microsoft. And then on the right-hand side are the guys that worked on the Apple II computer in the early 80s. So do you have the right team in place, or is the right team in place to actually make this business a success? So having the greatest idea and doing all of this planning and analysis is fantastic, but the next step is to then actually go out and do it. And the people that are going to go out and do it are the team involved in the project. So if you're going to invest some money, or if you're going to be involved in this, you need to make sure that you've got the right people there that are actually going to take this thing through to its success. So what we're looking at is whenever I'm looking at potentially a new team member, one of the first things I look at is not their technical skills or anything like that. What I look at is the soft skills stuff. You know, do they believe in and have a passion for the business and its vision? Okay, if they don't, especially with a startup, you're going to struggle to get them to fully commit to trying to make this thing a success. So they need to believe in and have passion in the business and the vision. If they do, we've got a tick, and that's a great indicator of potentially success in the future. And with startups, there's a lot of effort required, and potentially a lot of effort required for very little results to start with. Are they willing and capable of putting in the regular and then extra effort when required, especially in the face of not so great results to start with? Can they and will they effectively communicate what they are doing and the progress they are making? Again, these are all applicable for regular businesses as well, but especially for a startup, communication is essential, especially when you're potentially breaking apart and working on things separately. You need to be able to communicate and let each other know what's happening and what's going on. If you've got investors involved, those investors stick their cash in, and obviously the startup being very risky, they're always nervous about that. So regular and often communication about what's happening will put them at ease. Do they have the confidence to make a decision when it's required? With the pace at which some of these startups move, you need to make decisions on the fly, and you need to have your team members that can make those decisions. If they sort of and and they procrastinate a little bit, then maybe a startup environment's not the best for them. Okay. Will they stick it out when the business encounters those inevitable setbacks? So you don't want to bring somebody on board who at the first sign of trouble goes, you know what, this is all too hard, I'm out, I can't do this anymore, away I go. You potentially invested some time and money or effort on that particular person only to have to then replace them, potentially during a crisis or a critical phase of development. So you need to make sure, or need to try and make sure that they'll stick it out when times get tough. And do they possess exceptional skills in their area of expertise? So with a startup, you've got different areas of expertise that you need to draw upon. And do they have those exceptional skills? If they're average or mediocre, then you will struggle, especially during a startup business, to actually get things happening. So those are the attributes of the people that you should be looking at. Okay. What I've then put forward is, well, what is the right skill mix for the startup? And I've broken it into 5 different areas, and I think that you need to have one person in each of those areas, or if you're really small, maybe a person that goes across 2 or 3, but you need to have skills in each of those areas. The first one is technical. So somebody needs to deeply understand and be able to deliver, if necessary, the product or service on offer. Now, they don't necessarily need to be doing it themselves, but they need to have the capability of doing it themselves. If they don't have that profound understanding of how the technical thing works, you've got to employ or bring in outside contractors or consultants. And I've not seen a lot of businesses, successful startup businesses, start that way. Sales. Without any sales, there is no business. So somebody needs to sell it. And the greatest technical skills and the greatest knowledge about this particular product or service or solution doesn't necessarily translate into being able to sell it effectively. So you need to have somebody with sales skills. Customer support, as I mentioned before, sometimes the greatest sales skills aren't the best customer support skills. So you need to have somebody that can handle customer support, somebody that can handhold a new customer through a particular new process or procedure or something, handle complaints and handle them effectively. So, of course, happy customers will often result in referrals and repeat business. So obviously the customer service or customer support is important. Administration. So if we've got our entrepreneurs listening in today, I mentioned administration and everyone switches off. Methodical, boring, and the bane of every entrepreneur. However, without a solid administration support for a business, things will fall apart. So, it's often overlooked and undervalued, but it is essential as the other skills for the effective running of a business. And finally, personally, I think the most important thing is finance. So without the money, the business won't survive. Somebody needs to understand the finances. They need to have an ability to monitor results, manage the cash flow, manage the resources, and make sure that good decisions are being made in relation to those resources. So having somebody on board that understands those finances, I think, is essential. So I've taken you through, and I'm running out of time a little bit, but essentially we've covered today those 7 steps that I see that you need to do to assess whether or not a new business idea will actually be a success or potentially a success. Obviously, implementation is always the most important thing, but it's the old thing, a failure to plan is a plan to fail. So by going through these steps, you create good plans and good analysis about what will be needed to actually make a success of this idea. So hopefully you've taken away something today that will be of use for you. Does anyone have any questions? So as I said before, you can just pop questions down to the left-hand corner there. I can't see that anyone was typing. So, but if you have any questions and sort of don't sort of feel a bit shy about maybe asking them here, I think my email details have been included. I'm just being told to go to the next screen. You can download the guide that I spoke about today, which is probably a little more coherent in my presentation. But you can download the guide at henrycurran.com.au. Just search the guide for startup success. It will take you through to the web page. You just need to plug in your email address and you can download the PDF version of that there. Okay, there are my contact details. So if you do have any questions, feel a bit nervous about now, just flick me an email and I'm happy to have a quick phone call or shoot you back a response in relation to that. And finally, the legal stuff, disclaimers. Obviously, all this is general advice and not intended to substitute your own research and professional advice and judgment and all those sorts of things. Thank you for spending an hour with me this morning. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll hopefully maybe speak to some of you later.